Death did not come with a bright white light, a profound sense of peaceful closure, or a glorious, heavenly chorus of weeping celestial angels welcoming her. For Mia, a 32-year-old senior project manager whose blood was essentially a dark roast espresso blend, death arrived as a catastrophic REF error in a macro-heavy Excel spreadsheet. She had been staring at the cursed screen for 48 hours straight, desperately trying to finalize the Q3 deliverables for a tech startup run by a CEO who thought synergy was a measurable metric. As she reached for her 12th lukewarm cup of coffee, a sharp, white-hot pain blossomed behind her left eye. The world tilted. The spreadsheet blurred into a sea of meaningless numbers. Her final earthly thought was not of her family or unfulfilled dreams, but a panicked realization that she hadn't saved the document. Then darkness. When she opened her eyes again, there were no spreadsheets. There was, however, an aggressive amount of pink ruffled silk. Mia blinked, her vision slowly focusing on a lavish, obscenely gaudy canopy bed. The heavy, stifling air smelled intensely of freshly crushed roses and extremely expensive lavender, which was a very stark contrast to the endlessly sterile scent of her depressing corporate cubicle. Before she could process the sheer volume of lace surrounding her, a sharp gasp echoed through the cavernous room. "My lady, you have finally awakened." A young woman in a classic French-made outfit threw herself at the bedside, weeping hysterically. "The apothecary said the fever might take you, but the goddess has shown mercy." Mia stared at her. "Did I miss the morning stand-up meeting?" The maid wailed louder. Confused, Mia pushed herself up, catching sight of her reflection in a massive, gold-gilded vanity mirror across the room. She froze. Staring back at her was a breathtakingly beautiful woman with cascading silver hair and eyes the color of freshly spilled blood. She possessed the sharp, haughty features of someone who regularly kicked puppies for sport. Mia knew that face. She knew it intimately, because she had spent her precious 30 minutes of daily commuting time reading a trashy fantasy romance web novel titled The Sun Saint's Ascension. She was looking at Lady Cecilia von Rothsey, the arrogant, wildly incompetent, and ultimately doomed villainess. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Mia whispered, her voice melodious and dripping with inherent privilege. Her mind raced, processing the data with the brutal efficiency of a seasoned corporate strategist. Fact 1. She was dead. Fact 2. She had transmigrated into a fictional universe. Fact 3. According to the plot of the novel, Lady Cecilia was scheduled to be publicly beheaded by Crown Prince Alistair at the Winter Gala in exactly 6 months after a botched attempt to poison the heroine. 6 months. She had a 6-month deadline before project termination. And by project termination, she meant decapitation. Mia swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her bare feet sinking into a ridiculously plush rug. The maid, still sobbing, looked up in alarm. "My lady, you should rest." "There is no time for rest, Marie," Mia said, instantly recalling the maid's name from the novel's exposition. "We have a critical timeline to adjust. Fetch my trunks." "Your trunks? Are we going to the summer estate?" "No," Mia replied, stalking towards the massive mahogany wardrobe to inspect her new inventory. If the Crown Prince was going to execute her, the logical pivot was to find a competitor to leverage against him. The novel's ultimate antagonist, Demon Lord Malachi, resided in the Obsidian Wastes. He was terrifying, ruthless, and historically immune to royal authority. "Perfect. We are defecting to the dark side," Mia announced, tossing a violently purple velvet gown onto the floor. "And cancel my afternoon appointments immediately. Furthermore, bring me plenty of parchment and fresh ink. I need to draft a completely foolproof, solid business proposal." Chapter 1. Liquidating a ducal estate's assets in under 4 hours was a logistical nightmare, but Mia had once managed a software migration for a multinational corporation over a holiday weekend. This was child's play. "Leave the corset, Marie. The return on investment for my internal organ functionality is entirely too low," Cecilia barked, tossing a velvet pouch of illegally large rubies into a modest, durable leather satchel. "We are pivoting to a lean startup model. Only take what is easily fenced or holds intrinsic market value." Marie, still weeping quietly into a lace handkerchief, packed a single, sensible woolen dress. "But my lady, the Obsidian Wastes. It is a land of death, despair, and unspeakable evil." "It's an untapped emerging market with absolutely zero royal oversight," Cecilia corrected, awkwardly strapping a hunting knife to her thigh. It clashed horribly with her silk riding habit, but visual aesthetics were now entirely secondary to survival. Now go to the stables. Bribe the senior carriage driver with the emerald earrings. Tell him we need a direct route, no scenic detours, and I expect him to maintain a steady 60 miles per day. I will not tolerate supply chain delays. By dusk, the carriage was rattling aggressively toward the border, leaving the sparkling, treacherous capital city of Oakhaven far behind. Inside the bumpy cabin, Cecilia ignored the bruised state of her delicate villainous thighs and focused her attention on a hastily drawn strategy map illuminated by a flickering lantern. According to her memory of the web novel's lore, Crown Prince Alistair was an incompetent Nepo baby whose entire political strategy relied on his charming smile and the plot armor of his eventual lover, the pure-hearted heroine. But Demon Lord Malachi? He was a self-made entity, a tyrannical powerhouse who had carved a terrifying empire out of volcanic rock and sheer spite. Sure, he was destined to be defeated by the heroic party in Chapter 85, but that was clearly because he lacked a cohesive long-term business strategy and relied too heavily on micromanagement. That was exactly what she was bringing to the table. 2 days later, the lush green forests gave way to jagged, blackened earth and skies the color of an old bruise. The air smelled strongly of sulfur and poor sanitation management. The carriage abruptly halted at the gates of perdition, a colossal, terrifying archway made of actual human bones. The driver refused to go a single foot further, abandoning Cecilia and a trembling Marie with their single satchel in the dirt. Perfect. The last mile of delivery is always the most problematic, Cecilia muttered, dusting ash off her skirts. She marched directly up to the two towering, heavily armored gargoyles guarding the gate. They gripped massive battle axes, their eyes glowing with demonic hellfire. They blinked down at her, momentarily paralyzed by the sheer audacity of a human noblewoman knocking on the gates of hell. Good afternoon, Cecilia said briskly, utilizing her best, most commanding customer-facing voice. I am Lady Cecilia von Rothesay. I do not have a scheduled appointment, which I acknowledge is a breach of standard protocol, but I have a highly time-sensitive proposition for your CEO. Excuse me, your demon lord. Please inform him that an external consultant is here to discuss a mutually beneficial merger. The gargoyles exchanged a slow, bewildered look. One of them scratched its horned head with the blunt end of its axe. You want to be eaten? I want to speak to management, Cecilia clarified, her tone dropping a terrifying octave. Immediately. 20 minutes later, after completely bypassing standard security protocols through sheer, unapologetic corporate confidence, Cecilia was escorted into the central throne room. It was a cavernous, terrifying space lit by floating orbs of dark, crackling magic. At the far end, slouched upon a massive throne carved from obsidian, was Malachi. He was devastatingly handsome in an aggressive, sharp-edged way, pale skin, sweeping obsidian horns curving back through midnight black hair, and crimson eyes that currently radiated deep, profound annoyance. A human, Malachi's voice echoed, cold and resonant enough to make Marie whimper in terror. Walking willingly into my domain. Do you have a death wish, little noble? I have a business plan, Cecilia stated, stepping forward and completely ignoring the chorus of hisses from the shadows. She quickly evaluated his posture, the chaotic, disorganized scattering of parchment at the base of his throne, and the visibly stressed demon general standing nearby rubbing his temples. And from the looks of your current organizational infrastructure, she added, crossing her arms and raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. You desperately need it. Your ergonomics are terrible, your defensive perimeter is poorly staffed, and I am willing to bet your overhead costs are driving this empire into a severe recession. Now shall we sit down and talk terms? Or would you prefer to keep losing valuable territory to a prince whose primary qualification is having good hair? Malachi stopped slouching. For the first time in 3 centuries, the terrifying demon lord was absolutely speechless. Chapter 2. Silence stretched through the cavernous throne room, thick and heavy. The shadows, previously swirling with menacing intent, seemed to pause. Malachi, the supreme architect of nightmares and bringer of the end times, slowly leaned forward. The obsidian throne groaned under his imposing weight. You speak of overhead and recessions to the harbinger of your realm's doom? Malachi's voice was a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated right through the floorboards. I am the darkness that stalks the night. I do not care about ergonomics. Which perfectly explains why your posture is a disaster and you are clearly suffering from lumbar strain, Cecilia countered, not breaking eye contact. Look, your malevolence. You can either murder me right now and continue hemorrhaging resources until Crown Prince Alistair casually strolls in and smites you in chapter. Excuse me, in 6 months. Or you can give me 30 minutes to review your ledgers and prove my value. Malachi's crimson eyes narrowed. He possessed the power to turn her into a pile of ash with a mere flick of his wrist. Yet there was something deeply hypnotic about the sheer, blinding audacity of this tiny, silk-clad human. Varkas, Malachi barked, not looking away from Cecilia. The stressed demon general beside the throne flinched. Yes, my lord. Bring the human our ledgers. Let us see if her business plan survives contact with reality. 10 minutes later, a heavy oak table had been dragged into the center of the room. Cecilia stood over it. Her sleeves rolled up to her elbows, staring down at a mountain of chaotic, blood-stained parchment. Marie stood in the corner, clutching the satchel and trying desperately not to make eye contact with a passing hellhound. Cecilia pinched the bridge of her nose. The headache that had heralded her death in her past life was threatening a vicious comeback. This is not a balance sheet, Cecilia said softly, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. This is a cry for help. Our accounting methods are ancient and forged in the fires of the abyss. Varkas offered defensively, crossing his 4 muscular arms. Your accounting methods are a complete liability, Cecilia snapped, picking up a crumbling piece of parchment. She grabbed a quill and began aggressively annotating the margins. Let me summarize the critical failures I have identified in just the last 5 minutes of this audit. Gross asset mismanagement. You built a magma moat directly adjacent to your primary armory. According to these notes, ambient heat has warped over 40% of your broadswords. You are quite literally melting your own assets. Wasted OPX, operating expenses. There is a line item here for doomsday devices that cost 40,000 gold pieces, but the deployment phase is marked as pending because you didn't budget for the proprietary magical crystals to power them. You bought the hardware without the software. An optimized payroll. You are paying your goblin infantry in raw meat, but relying on a centralized distribution hub. The meat spoils before it reaches the outer defensive perimeter, leading to a 20% desertion rate. Your supply chain is fundamentally broken. Cecilia slammed the parchment down upon the table. You do not have an empire, Lord Malachi. You have a chaotic, highly combustible non-profit organization that is bleeding capital. Malachi had slowly descended from his throne during her tirade. He now stood on the opposite side of the table, towering over her. Up close, the sheer dark magical aura radiating from him was suffocating, but Cecilia was too thoroughly annoyed by the math to be intimidated. And your proposed solution, Lady Cecilia? Malachi asked, his tone dangerously soft. Immediate restructuring, Cecilia declared, tapping the table with her quill. I want full access to your operational budgets, a centralized command center, which I will be referring to as my office, and authority to implement agile workflows across all military and domestic departments. In exchange, I will optimize your realm, cut your overhead by 30%, and guarantee that when the Crown Prince arrives, he will be crushed under the weight of our superior strategic infrastructure. She extended a small, perfectly manicured hand across the table. Do we have alignment? Malachi looked at her hand, then up to her fierce, unyielding ruby eyes. Slowly, a dark, genuinely amused smirk curved the edges of his mouth. He reached out, his massive, claw-tipped hand engulfing hers entirely. The air sparked with a sudden, localized shockwave of dark magic, sealing the pact. Welcome to the organization, Lady Cecilia, the Demon Lord rumbled. Try not to die on your first day. Chapter 3. Cecilia's first executive action was requisitioning Dungeon Block C and rebranding it as the Strategic Operations Hub. The blood drains in the floor were covered with sensible area rugs. The Iron Maidens were repurposed as filing cabinets, and Marie was promoted to executive assistant, a role that mostly involved handing out fresh parchment and avoiding eye contact with passing ghouls. By her 3rd day, Cecilia had successfully identified the organization's most critical bottleneck, the Undead Division. Let me ensure I have this properly documented, Cecilia said. Tapping a charcoal stylus against a massive slate chalkboard, she had forced 2 trolls to drag into the room. She looked out over her captive audience. 3 high-ranking Lich Lords, a notoriously bloodthirsty vampire count named Villainess, and a vaguely damp ghoul who represented the rank-and-file zombies. You are telling me, she continued, her voice echoing with dangerous calm, that when two necromancers have an interdepartmental dispute over corpse allocation, the standard resolution protocol is a duel to the death? Naturally, Lord Vladis purred, flashing a terrifying set of fangs. The weak are purged. The strong inherit the flesh. The strong inherit a massive disruption in workflow, Cecilia snapped, slamming her hand against the chalkboard. The ghoul flinched, dropping a piece of its own ear onto the conference table. In the back of the room, leaning against a damp stone wall with his arms crossed over his broad chest, Malachi watched in utter fascination. Historically, keeping the undead division in line required him to occasionally incinerate a dissenting lord with hellfire. He had shown up to this mandatory HR seminar, fully expecting to scrape his new human consultant off the ceiling. Instead, she was scolding a 400-year-old apex predator like he was a junior intern who had jammed the copy machine. As of 0800 hours this morning, we are implementing a comprehensive non-human resources policy, Cecilia announced, aggressively circling a diagram on her board. We are losing 20% of our frontline infantry to friendly fire, cross-contamination, and entirely preventable workplace violence. This ends today. Cecilia distributed a stack of freshly bound parchment to the bewildered monsters. Memorandum: Undead Division Workplace Conduct and Compliance. Effective immediately, the following protocols are strictly enforced. No unsanctioned consumption of co-workers. If you need a blood source during working hours, you will submit a formal requisition form to the blood bank. Biting a goblin from the logistics team because you missed breakfast will result in an immediate performance improvement plan, PIP. Mandatory PPE, personal protective equipment, for decaying staff. Zombies and ghouls are required to wear containment netting while in communal areas. Leaving rotting appendages in the cafeteria is a severe health and safety violation. And frankly, it is terrible for team morale. Grievance escalation. No more curses, hexes, or duels to the death. If you have an issue with a colleague, you will bring it to mediation in my office. If you curse a colleague, the cost of the counter spell will be deducted directly from your departmental budget. Lord Vladis stood up, his velvet cape billowing with an unnatural wind. His eyes glowed with crimson fury. You dare dictate the nature of the night to us, mortal? I have drunk the blood of kings. I will not submit a requisition form for my sustenance. The temperature in the room plummeted. Malachi pushed off the wall, dark magic beginning to crackle at his fingertips. He prepared to intervene before his new, strangely captivating asset was torn to shreds. Sit down, Vladis, Cecilia commanded. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Unless you want me to audit the travel expenses you claimed for your hunting expedition to the Elven borders last month. Because according to the receipts, you spent 3,000 gold pieces on luxury sun-blocking parasols and vintage imported O-negative. I can and will freeze your discretionary spending account by lunch. Vladis froze. The terrifying, ancient creature of the night looked at the diminutive human woman, realized she held the keys to his lavish lifestyle, and slowly, resentfully, sat back down. I thought so, Cecilia said smoothly, adjusting her cuffs. Now let's move on to the PTO accrual rates for the graveyard shift. From the shadows, Malachi let out a low, rumbling chuckle that sent a shiver down the spines of every monster in the room. He stared at the silver-haired woman currently lecturing a lich on the importance of synergy, feeling a strange, unfamiliar tightness in his chest. She wasn't just surviving. She was optimizing his empire. And heaven help him, he found it completely intoxicating. Chapter 4. The newly rebranded Strategic Operations Hub smelled aggressively of pine needles and lemon juice, a direct result of Cecilia threatening the custodial slimes with a bleach substitute. The air of dread had been replaced by an equally oppressive atmosphere of high-stakes corporate productivity. Demon Lord Malachi, whose presence typically caused mortals to spontaneously weep, was currently standing in the center of the room, staring blankly at a 30-foot-long tapestry hung across the stone wall. It was covered in brightly colored, horizontal bars made from dyed yarn, pinned against a complex grid of dates and tasks. What? Malachi began, his deep voice carrying a note of profound confusion. Is this sorcery? This your malevolence, Cecilia announced proudly, tapping the tapestry with a long wooden pointer she had requisitioned from the torture chambers, is a Gantt chart, and it is going to save our Q4 objectives. Malachi crossed his massive arms, his dark cape pooling around his boots. It looks like a rainbow that has been violently disassembled. It is a visual representation of our project schedule, Cecilia corrected, ignoring his lack of vision. She marched over to the tapestry. As you know, Crown Prince Alistair's Holy Crusade of Righteous Cleansing is projected to reach our borders in exactly 5 months. Your previous defensive strategy essentially amounted to wait until they get here, and then unleash the hounds. This is a reactive strategy, Malachi. We need to be proactive. She pointed to a thick, crimson line of yarn at the top left of the chart. Here is our problem. This is a visual map of our task dependencies. You cannot simply unleash chaos. Chaos requires a sequential workflow. She tapped her pointer against 3 interconnected tasks. Task A. Summon the Greater Balrog of the 7th Pit. Task B. Inscribe the Grand Summoning Circle of Agony. Task C. Procure the feathers of a virgin harpy for the ink. You cannot summon the Balrog, Task A, without the circle, Task B, and you cannot draw the circle without the harpy feathers, Task C, Cecilia explained, her eyes shining with the manic zeal of a project manager in her element. Currently, your dark sorcerers are trying to summon the Balrog before logistics has secured the feathers. It is creating a critical bottleneck on the timeline, resulting in exploding interns. Malachi stared at the yarn. Then he stared at the interconnected pins. He traced the path with his eyes, from the procurement phase to the deployment phase. For 300 years, he had ruled through fear, instinct, and overwhelming magical power. If a minion failed, he smote them. If a plan failed, he burned the battlefield. He had never once considered the logistical nightmare of supply chain dependencies. It was brilliant. It was beautiful. The blue line, Malachi murmured, taking a slow step closer to the chart. He pointed a sharp, obsidian-clawed finger at a bar stretching across the middle of the grid. This represents the fortification of the Ashen Pass? Exactly, Cecilia said, a genuine smile breaking across her haughty, villainous features. And do you see how the blue line overlaps with the yellow line? The yellow line is the goblin weapon forging schedule, he deduced, his crimson eyes widening slightly as the matrix of data suddenly clicked into perfect, terrifying sense. If the forging is delayed, the fortification is delayed. And the entire critical path shifts to the right, Cecilia whispered, treating the concept of a delayed deadline with the solemn gravity of a terminal diagnosis. Malachi turned his head. He was now standing less than a foot away from her. Up close, Cecilia could see the faint, mesmerizing crackle of dark energy dancing in his irises. The scent of him, ozone, wood smoke, and dark magic, was suddenly very distracting. He reached out, his massive hand dwarfing hers, and gently took the wooden pointer from her grasp. Their fingers brushed. A jolt of electricity, entirely unrelated to spreadsheets, sparked between them. You have mapped out my entire apocalypse, Malachi said softly, his voice a dark, velvety purr that made Cecilia's heart perform an unoptimized flutter. With yarn. Optimization requires using the materials at hand, Cecilia managed to say, her throat suddenly dry. I have also color-coded the assassination attempts against me, if you'd care to review them. Malachi's amused smirk vanished, replaced instantly by a chilling, predatory scowl. Show me. Cecilia pointed to a small, neon-pink bar tucked away in the lower quadrant. I project the Crown Prince's shadow assassins will infiltrate the castle by week 3. I've scheduled a meeting with them in the courtyard. I believe your hellhounds have an opening in their calendar. The demon lord looked down at the diminutive, ruthless woman who had reorganized his kingdom, and casually scheduled her own attempted murderers for a team-building exercise with a pack of rabid monsters. Lady Cecilia, Malachi murmured, stepping so close she could feel the heat radiating off his armor. I am going to authorize your entire budget. Chapter 5. The Great Obsidian Forge had been burning continuously for 3 centuries, a deafening, terrifying symphony of hammers, hellfire, and the agonized screams of molten iron. Until Tuesday morning at the turning of the hourglass, when it went completely, devastatingly silent. Explain this, Malachi demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble as he stared down from the high stone balcony. Below them, the sprawling courtyard was packed with thousands of green-skinned, heavily armed goblins. The forge fires were dead. Instead of making the weapons necessary to defend the mountain pass, the horde was marching in an organized circle, carrying crude signs painted with boar's blood. Cecilia leaned over the stone railing, squinting to read the messy runes. No teeth, no peace. Bad meat makes bad swords. We want rest days. Well, Cecilia sighed. It appears the goblins have banded together. They are refusing to work. Malachi's hands gripped the stone railing so hard the ancient rock cracked. They are defying my absolute will? I will burn the front row to ash, and let the rest choke on the smoke. That will serve as a sufficient lesson. Absolutely not, Cecilia snapped, swatting his massive, magic crackling arm with her rolled-up parchment. Malachi actually flinched, not from pain, but from the sheer novelty of being physically scolded by a woman who barely reached his chest. You cannot vaporize your weapon makers, Malachi. Dead goblins do not forge swords, Cecilia explained, tapping her foot. This is a simple dispute between a lord and his workers. We do not use hellfire. We make a deal. 15 minutes later, a heavy wooden table had been dragged into the center of the hostile courtyard. Cecilia sat on one side, perfectly poised, with fresh ink and paper. Malachi stood menacingly behind her chair, a looming shadow of apocalyptic doom. Sitting across from them was Gribnock, the newly chosen leader of the Angry Smiths. Gribnock was missing half an ear, possessed a heavily scarred snout, and gripped a massive iron hammer. Let us review your complaints, Gribnock, Cecilia said briskly, looking at the dirty parchment the goblin had provided. You want more coin for working through the night, an end to the spoiled meat rations, and healers for your mouths? Yes, Gribnock grunted, crossing his warty arms. Smashing paladins with warhammers is bad for teeth. Biting through chainmail makes them crack. Bossman just tells us to rub dirt in it. Our spirits are low. We want healers to fix our teeth, or the forge stays cold. The thousands of goblins behind Gribnock let out a deafening, unified roar of agreement. Malachi's eyes glowed with violent intent, but Cecilia subtly pressed the heel of her slipper onto his armored toe, keeping him silent. Paying bone healers to look inside every single goblin's mouth would drain our gold vaults dry, Cecilia stated smoothly. Gribnock narrowed his eyes, gripping his hammer tighter. However, she countered, raising a single finger, I am prepared to offer a very good reward system. Cecilia quickly sketched a proposal on her paper. First, I will fix the food problem. We stop keeping all the meat in one giant hot room. I will have the mages build cold boxes in every single sleeping tent. Fresh meat daily. Gribnock nodded slowly. Good. What about the teeth? We implement a spoils of war rule, Cecilia offered, her ruby eyes gleaming with a clever light. Any gold, silver, or magical teeth taken from fallen enemies during battles will legally belong to the goblin who claims the kill. Furthermore, I will order 2 minor shadow mages to stay near the forges. They know how to reattach lost arms, so I am confident they can pull a rotten tooth. Gribnock's jaw dropped. He looked at the paper, then back at his hoard. We keep the paladin gold. The king's tax will not touch a single coin of it, Cecilia confirmed. Gribnock slammed his fist on the table. Deal. But we still want to wear comfortable clothes on the last day of the week. Granted, Cecilia agreed, standing up and extending her hand. Loincloths are acceptable, provided they do not catch fire near the open flames. The goblin shook her hand vigorously, grabbed the signed paper, and ran back to his brothers, screaming victoriously. Within minutes, the deafening, glorious roar of the great obsidian forge fired back to life. The work had begun again. Malachi stared at the retreating goblin army, completely dumbfounded. He had expected a bloodbath. Instead, he had witnessed a masterclass in rule-making. He looked down at Cecilia, who was calmly tucking the new pact into her leather bag. A fierce, unfamiliar surge of pure, unfiltered attraction hit him so hard it nearly knocked the breath from his demonic lungs. You, Malachi murmured, stepping around the table until he was mere inches from her, are the most terrifying creature in this entire realm. Cecilia looked up, a triumphant, breathless smirk on her lips. I know. Now come along, my lord. We have battle plans to draw. Chapter 6. The cavernous dining hall of the Obsidian Keep had, until recently, been a place where Malachi brooded in silence while gnawing on the charred bones of magical beasts. Now, it featured a sensible mahogany table, properly polished silver, and a centerpiece of dark, blood-red roses that Cecilia had requisitioned from the royal greenhouse before she defected. According to my analysis, your current reputation management is a disaster, Cecilia stated, elegantly slicing a piece of medium-rare drake steak. She gestured with her silver fork toward a stack of reports resting dangerously close to her gravy boat. You are relying entirely on the ultimate evil brand. It is overly broad, Malachi. We need targeted, demographic-specific fear. Malachi sat at the opposite end of the table, entirely ignoring his own plate. He was currently resting his chin on his massive, gauntlet fist, his glowing crimson eyes fixed entirely on her. I drown the Eastern elves in a tide of eternal shadows, Malachi rumbled, his voice echoing off the vaulted stone ceiling. I believe the messaging was quite clear. Yes, but did it drive engagement? Cecilia countered, taking a delicate sip of spiced blackberry wine. The humans in the capital just think you are a distant, vague threat. Crown Prince Alistair is currently using your lack of clear messaging to paint himself as a brave, proactive savior. We need to control the narrative. I propose a series of minor, highly visible strategic curses along the trade routes. Inconvenient enough to cause panic, but not costly enough to drain our mana reserves. Malachi didn't answer. He just kept staring at her. The flickering light from the black iron chandeliers cast sharp, dramatic shadows across his impossibly handsome face, highlighting the curve of his obsidian horns and the broad, intimidating line of his shoulders. Cecilia shifted slightly in her velvet chair, suddenly hyper-aware of the fact that they were completely alone in the massive room. The usual corporate shield she wore around her heart was beginning to feel alarmingly thin under his intense, predatory gaze. "Is there an issue with the proposal?" she asked, her voice losing a fraction of its usual brisk authority. "The workday is over, Cecilia," Malachi said softly. It was the first time he had spoken her name without her formal title, and the deep, velvet rumble of it sent a highly unprofessional shiver down her spine. "I am a consultant," Cecilia replied defensively, clutching her wine glass a little tighter. "My brain is always on the clock. Optimization does not sleep." Malachi stood up. The sheer size of him, wrapped in dark magic and dark silk, was breathtaking. He walked slowly down the length of the table, his heavy boots making no sound on the stone floor. When he reached her side, he didn't attack her reports or scowl at her ledgers. Instead, he reached out and gently plucked the silver fork from her trembling hand, setting it down on the table. Then, he slid the stack of reputation management reports out of her reach. "Optimization requires rest, does it not?" Malachi murmured, leaning down until his face was mere inches from hers. The scent of him, wood smoke, ozone and pure, intoxicating power, wrapped around her senses. "You have rebuilt my armies. You have pacified my generals. You have even made the goblins happy. But you have barely eaten your dinner." Cecilia looked up into his eyes. The terrifying demon lord wasn't looking at her like she was a liability, or an asset, or a spreadsheet to be balanced. He was looking at her like she was the only fascinating thing in his entire, centuries-long existence. Cecilia stammered, a system-critical error occurring in her usually flawless brain. "The drake steak is very tough." Malachi's lips curved into a devastating, genuine smile. He reached out, his large, claw-tipped fingers gently tucking a stray lock of silver hair behind her ear. His touch was shockingly warm, completely overriding her internal risk assessment protocols. "Then tomorrow," Malachi promised, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before returning to her wide ruby eyes, "I will burn the kitchens to the ground and find you a better chef." For the first time since she had transmigrated into a doomed villainess, Cecilia was completely, wonderfully out of her depth. Chapter 7. The heavy, enchanted obsidian doors of the Grand Keep did not simply open. They were violently, dramatically blasted off their iron hinges by a blinding wave of holy light. Smoke billowed into the grand foyer, accompanied by the dramatic, soaring swell of what sounded suspiciously like a magical choir. Through the settling dust strode Crown Prince Alistair. His golden armor gleamed with an obnoxiously pristine shine. His jaw was set in a heroic square, and his sword was raised high. Flanking him was Alara, the pure-hearted heroine wielding the staff of ultimate radiance, along with a brooding rogue and a heavily muscled cleric. "Tremble, creatures of the abyss!" Alistair bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I am the Dawnbringer. I have come to pierce the heart of darkness, slay the demon lord, and cleanse this wretched land of its foul." "Excuse me," a small, trembling voice interrupted. Alistair blinked, lowering his glowing sword a fraction of an inch. Sitting behind a newly installed, sensible oak reception desk just inside the foyer was Marie. She was wearing a neat blouse and violently clutching a quill. Next to her was a small, polished brass bell and a framed placard. Notice to all visitors. Unscheduled heroic incursions are subject to immediate expulsion. Please sign in with the executive assistant and take a badge. Do you have an appointment? Marie squeaked, nervously tapping the visitor log. Because Lord Malachi is in a Q3 forecasting sprint until noon, and he strictly requested no interruptions. The heroic party froze. The rogue checked his map, utterly bewildered. Before Alistair could recover his heroic momentum, the sharp, rhythmic clicking of heels echoed down the grand staircase. Cecilia descended, holding a clipboard and flanked by two heavily armored gargoyles carrying filing cabinets. Alistair, Cecilia sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. I specifically noted in my departure memo that any attempts to contact me required a minimum of 3 business days' notice. Did you simply ignore the out-of-office auto-reply my mages sent you? Cecilia? Alistair gasped, pointing a gauntlet finger at her. You treacherous witch. I knew your soul was rotten. But to ally yourself with the ultimate evil? Step aside so that I may smite him. I am not stepping aside, and nobody is getting smited today, Cecilia snapped, marching right up to the glowing blade and pushing it down with her clipboard. Do you have any idea what you've just done to my facility's climate control? We live on a frozen wasteland, Alistair. You blew the front doors off. She began furiously scribbling on her clipboard. Let's review the immediate compliance violations of your little crusade, shall we? Violation. Responsible party. Penalty/restitution. Destruction of historic property. Crown Prince Alistair. 5,000 gold due immediately. Noise ordinance violation. The magical choir. Confiscation of all musical instruments. Unsanctioned flash photography, holy light. Lady Alara. 48-hour containment in holding cells. Alara, the sweet, pure-hearted heroine, stepped forward, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Cecilia, please. The light can still save you. You don't have to be a prisoner to this dark, administrative nightmare. I am not a prisoner, Alara. I am the chief operating officer, Cecilia corrected, thoroughly insulted. And frankly, my compensation package here is vastly superior to the beheading Alistair had scheduled for me. Enough of these wicked lies. Alistair roared, puffing out his chest. I demand to see the Demon Lord. Bring forth Malachi so we may end this inglorious combat. Lord Malachi's calendar is currently blocked out for strategic planning, Cecilia replied, entirely unbothered. She checked a silver pocket watch. However, I had a marketing meeting at 3 o'clock that just got cancelled. I can pencil you in for a 30-minute grievance and combat consultation in Conference Room B. Will that work for your schedule? Alistair opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Alara, who just shrugged helplessly. Ice, 3 o'clock is fine. Excellent. Marie, please issue the Dawnbringer a temporary visitor badge, Cecilia ordered briskly. And Alistair? If you are late, you forfeit your time slot, and we default to boiling oil. Have a seat in the waiting area. From the shadows of the upper balcony, Malachi watched the supposedly unstoppable heroic party meekly take their seats on a row of uncomfortable wooden benches. His dark, terrifying heart swelled with an emotion he could only describe as absolute, unwavering devotion. He didn't need to fight the hero. His COO had just defeated him with calendar management. Chapter 8. The Evaluation and Synergy Chamber, formerly the subterranean interrogation pit, was deliberately kept at a slightly uncomfortable ambient temperature to ensure meetings remained brief and focused. Cecilia sat behind a sleek obsidian desk, a cup of aggressively caffeinated dark roast resting beside a meticulously organized stack of personnel files. Sitting opposite her, sweating profusely beneath his heavy velvet robes, was Moros, the supreme master of the Black Flame and head of the Arcane Destruction Department. Malachi stood by the chamber door, leaning casually against the stone frame. He was officially there to provide executive oversight, but unofficially he was just thoroughly enjoying the show. Let us review your key performance indicators for the second quarter, Moros, Cecilia began, adjusting her reading glasses and opening his file. Your overall spellcasting output is certainly high. You initiated 42 hexes, summoned 6 minor demons, and successfully cursed a neighboring kingdom's harvest. Moros puffed out his chest, the glowing purple runes on his robes pulsing with pride. The harvest withered perfectly. Their peasants weep in the dirt. I am a master of the abyssal arts. Yes, you are, Cecilia agreed smoothly, tapping her quill against the desk. But you are also a budgetary nightmare. Have you looked at your mana to casualty ratio? Moros blinked, his sinister smile faltering. My what? Your efficiency metrics, Cecilia sighed, sliding a parchment graph across the desk. When you retrieved the stolen grimoire from the elven thieves last month, you utilized the Tears of the Void spell, a tier 9 incantation. It crushed their sanctuary into dust, Moros declared defensively. It also destroyed 3 miles of our own goblin-laid cobblestone road, and completely vaporized a very lucrative toll booth, Cecilia countered sharply. You used a tactical nuke to kill a mosquito, Moros. The collateral damage alone entirely erased the arcane department's operational budget for the rest of the year. Furthermore, your 360-degree peer feedback is abysmal. Moros looked genuinely offended. I do not care what my peers think. I am feared by all. You are annoying to all, Cecilia corrected, reading from a supplementary sheet. I have 3 separate complaints from the necromancers, stating that you refused to clean out the communal cauldron after brewing your potions. Leaving hardened frog spleens in the breakroom sink is a severe violation of workplace etiquette. From the doorway, Malachi let out a low, dangerous rumble. Leaving a mess in the communal cauldron, Moros? Disappointing. The sorcerer visibly shrank, suddenly realizing that the terrifying demon lord was actively backing up the human consultant's petty grievance reports. I will endeavor to be more mindful of the shared spaces, my lord. See that you do, Cecilia said briskly. I am putting you on a performance improvement plan, PIP. For the next 30 days, you are restricted to Tier 3 spells and below. You will also attend a mandatory seminar on mana conservation, and you hosted by the accounting department. Tier 3. Moros gasped, clutching his dark staff. But how will I strike terror into the hearts of mortals? Get creative, Cecilia advised, stamping his file with a bright red approved seal. Fear is not always about explosions. Have you considered minor, localized curses? Making their shoes constantly untie? Or ensuring their coffee is always lukewarm? Psychological warfare is highly cost-effective. Now please send in the head conjurer on your way out. Moros practically scrambled out of the room, his cape catching in the heavy door as he fled the administrative terror. Once the door clicked shut, Malachi walked slowly toward the desk. He leaned over it, bracing his massive hands on either side of her neat stacks of paper. The scent of ozone and dark magic instantly short-circuited Cecilia's carefully maintained professional demeanor. A performance improvement plan, Malachi murmured, his crimson eyes gleaming with dark amusement and profound admiration. I used to just throw them into the lava pits. High turnover rates are terrible for organizational stability, Cecilia whispered, her breath catching slightly as he leaned closer. You are optimizing my sorcerers, Malachi said, his voice dropping to a velvety purr. Tell me, Lady Cecilia, when do I get my performance review? Cecilia looked up at his devastatingly handsome face, her corporate vocabulary suddenly failing her. I will have to check my calendar. Your deliverables have been highly satisfactory. Malachi smiled, a slow, incredibly wicked expression that promised a complete and total disruption of all her professional boundaries. Good, because I am very eager to discuss my long-term retention package. Chapter 9. Conference Room B was impeccably prepared. A pitcher of enchanted, ice-cold water sat in the center of a polished mahogany table, alongside a neat stack of non-disclosure agreements. At exactly 2:59 p.m., the heavy wooden doors swung open. Crown Prince Alistair strode in, his golden armor clanking loudly, followed by a very nervous-looking heroic party. Alistair immediately drew his glowing sword, pointing it dramatically across the table. Your reign of terror ends today, Malachi, Alistair shouted, ignoring the fact that Malachi was currently pouring himself a glass of water. I have come to audit the darkness of this realm and balance the scales of justice. Please refer to the placard, Alistair, Cecilia sighed, not looking up from her notes. Alistair blinked, lowering his sword slightly to read the small silver sign on the table. No drawn weapons or holy smites in conference rooms. Violators will be billed for furniture replacement. With a frustrated grunt, he sheathed the sword. Fine. But know that the heavens themselves authorize this crusade. Do they? Cecilia asked, finally looking up. She steepled her fingers. Because according to my records, you are currently conducting an unsanctioned, hostile audit without proper regulatory jurisdiction. Alistair slammed his gauntlet hands onto the table. I am the Crown Prince of Oakhaven. Everywhere the light touches is my jurisdiction. A common misconception regarding zoning laws, Cecilia said smoothly. She reached into her leather satchel and pulled out a terrifyingly thick, iron-bound binder. It hit the table with a resounding, heavy thud. What is that foul tome? The party's cleric gasped, gripping his holy symbol. This, Cecilia said, flipping the binder open to a color-coded tab, is the Treaty of the Ashen Divide, signed in the year 402 by your great-great-grandfather and Lord Malachi. I spent my lunch break in the restricted archives reviewing the original land deeds. And guess what? This entire volcanic wasteland is zoned exclusively for demonic use. Alara, the pure-hearted heroine, stepped forward, looking deeply confused. But the prophecy, the oracle said we must conquer the dark lands. Oracles do not have legislative authority, Alara, Cecilia explained patiently, as if speaking to a slow intern. Prophecies are essentially unsolicited marketing materials. They hold zero legal weight in a property dispute. Cecilia slid a dense, text-heavy parchment across the table. This is a formal cease and desist order. By invading the Obsidian Wastes, you are in direct violation of a centuries-old sovereign treaty. If you draw that sword again, it is not a holy crusade. It is an unprovoked act of war that will completely devastate Oakhaven's international credit rating and void your trade agreements with the Elven Coalition. Alistair stared at the paper. His heroic jaw worked up and down, but no words came out. He looked at his rogue, who offered a helpless shrug. He looked at his cleric, who was suddenly very interested in the ceiling architecture. You can't just bureaucratize a holy war. Alistair sputtered, his face turning a brilliant shade of crimson. I just did, Cecilia replied, giving him a flat, uncompromising corporate smile. Now, I am giving you two options. Option A. You sign the acknowledgement of the cease and desist, pay the 5,000 gold piece invoice for my front doors, and leave the premises. Option B. You refuse, and I escalate this to my CEO for immediate, physical arbitration. She gestured gracefully to the shadowy corner of the room. Malachi stepped forward. He didn't summon hellfire. He didn't roar. He simply let a fraction of his oppressive, world-ending aura bleed into the room. The temperature plummeted. The water in the pitcher instantly froze solid. The sheer, crushing weight of his presence brought the heroic party to their knees, gasping for air. I highly recommend option A, Malachi whispered, his voice vibrating in their very bones. Trembling, Alistair grabbed a quill, hastily scrawled his signature on the legal document, and tossed a heavy pouch of gold onto the table. This isn't over, Cecilia. I will consult my legal counsel. The High Wizards will hear of this. Please CC me on the correspondence, Cecilia called out cheerfully as the heroic party scrambled out of the conference room, tripping over their own capes in their haste to escape. Silence descended on conference room B. Cecilia carefully filed the signed cease and desist into her binder, thoroughly satisfied with the Q3 risk mitigation. Suddenly, a massive, gauntlet hand covered hers, stopping her movements. She looked up. Malachi was staring at her, his breathing slightly elevated, his crimson eyes burning with an intensity that had absolutely nothing to do with treaties or audits. You weaponized a land deed, Malachi said, his voice dropping to a dark, ragged whisper. It was the most efficient route to conflict resolution. Cecilia breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Malachi didn't say another word. He simply hauled her out of her chair, wrapped a powerful arm around her waist, and pulled her flush against his chest. Chapter 10. The kiss completely bypassed Cecilia's internal firewall and executed a critical system override. Malachi's lips were firm, warm, and tasted of dark wine and impending doom. He kissed her with the same absolute, terrifying certainty with which he ruled the Obsidian Wastes. Cecilia, whose previous romantic experiences mostly involved passive-aggressive emails from a marketing director named Greg, instantly melted against his armored chest. Her clipboard clattered to the stone floor, forgotten. He deepened the kiss, one massive hand sliding up to tangle in her silver hair, the other holding her firmly against him. The dark magic in the room buzzed like an overloaded server, the air crackling with raw, unfiltered chemistry. Then the conference room door burst open. "My lord! Lady Cecilia!" Cecilia and Malachi sprang apart. Malachi looked ready to unleash a millennium of pent-up hellfire, his eyes glowing a blinding, furious crimson. Standing in the doorway was a trembling, low-level skeleton courier, holding a damp piece of parchment. "A thousand pardons, but the lava pit custodians demand an immediate signature for their new mop buckets." Cecilia stared at the skeleton. She looked at her fallen clipboard. She looked at Malachi, who was currently taking a deep, shuddering breath to calm his murderous intent. The absolute sheer audacity of a janitorial supply requisition, interrupting the greatest romantic milestone of her 2 lifetimes, snapped something inside her brain. "That is it," Cecilia declared, aggressively smoothing her ruffled silk skirts. She marched over, snatched the parchment from the skeleton, and scrawled her initials on it. "We are implementing strict operational boundaries." 30 minutes later, every departmental head, demon general, and union representative received a magically duplicated piece of enchanted parchment. Memorandum: Establishment of core working hours. To all Obsidian Waste staff. From Office of the Chief Operating Officer. Effective immediately, my official working hours are strictly set from 8 to 1700 hours, Monday through Friday. Any communications, magical summons, or catastrophic emergencies occurring outside of this window will be met with an automated out-of-office response, and will not be addressed until the following business day. Exceptions to this rule: there are none. If the castle is on fire after 5 p.m., please consult the fire suppression slimes. By 5:01 p.m., Cecilia was in her private chambers. She had shed her restrictive corset for a luxurious, flowing black silk robe, poured herself a large glass of elven wine, and settled into a velvet armchair with a trashy romance novel she had confiscated from a captured paladin. Meanwhile, in the central throne room, Malachi was experiencing an unprecedented emotional crisis. It was 6:30 p.m. The castle was quiet. The ledgers were balanced. The goblin forges were operating at peak, union-approved efficiency. He had nothing to conquer, no heroes to smite, and absolutely no reason to call his COO into his office. He stared at a stack of beautifully color-coded quarterly projections on his desk. They were flawless. They were also incredibly boring without Cecilia aggressively tapping her wooden pointer against them. "Varkas," Malachi growled to his general. "The southern perimeter defenses. Are there any critical vulnerabilities?" Varkas blinked. "No, my lord. Lady Cecilia optimized the patrol routes yesterday. We are operating at 120% efficiency." "What about the gargoyles?" Malachi pressed, pacing like a caged predator. "Are they rebelling?" "They are currently attending a mandatory team-building seminar on active listening," Varkas replied, looking deeply confused. "My lord, the realm has never been more secure." Malachi scowled. He couldn't manufacture an emergency. Cecilia would see right through it, and likely penalize him for wasting company time. He needed a loophole. At exactly 7:15 p.m., a heavy, tentative knock echoed through Cecilia's private chambers. "I am strictly off the clock," Cecilia called out, not looking up from her book. "Unless someone is bleeding out on a spreadsheet, leave it for the morning stand-up." The door clicked open. "No spreadsheets," a deep, velvety voice rumbled. "And no bleeding." Cecilia lowered her book. Malachi stood in her doorway, and for the first time since she had met him, he was not wearing his intimidating, spiked battle armor. Instead, he wore a simple, beautifully tailored dark tunic and loose trousers. He looked less like the supreme architect of nightmares, and more like a devastatingly handsome man who had brought a bottle of 300-year-old blood wine and 2 crystal glasses. "Malachi," Cecilia said, her pulse immediately spiking. "This is a direct violation of the boundary protocols I instituted 3 hours ago." "I read the memo carefully," Malachi countered, a wicked, triumphant smirk playing on his lips as he stepped into the room and closed the heavy oak door behind him. "It specifically restricts communications regarding the Obsidian Waste staff. It said absolutely nothing about fraternizing with the CEO." He walked over, gently plucking the trashy romance novel from her hands, and replacing it with a glass of wine. "I am currently out of office, Lord Malachi," Cecilia whispered, completely forgetting her carefully curated vocabulary as he leaned down, bracing his hands on the arms of her chair. "Good. Malachi murmured, his crimson eyes locking onto hers as his gaze dropped to her lips. Because I am very tired of talking about business. Chapter 11. The high commanders of the Obsidian Keep were entirely incapable of working together. If Lord Villainess, the ancient vampire, wanted to strike from the shadows, Varkas the demon general would loudly demand a frontal assault. If Moros the shadow mage requested more magical crystals for his traps, the goblin chieftains would refuse to dig them up. The high council meetings had devolved into 3 hours of roaring, hissing, and the occasional thrown dagger. Cecilia finally slammed her hands onto the heavy stone table, the sharp sound cutting through the chaos. "This ends today," she commanded, her ruby eyes glaring at the gathered warlords. "You fight each other with more passion than you fight the Holy Knights of Oakhaven. An army that strikes itself is already defeated. Tomorrow at dawn, every commander will meet at the Ashen Caldera." Villainess scoffed, wiping a speck of dust from his velvet cloak. "The lava pits? That is a training ground for mindless beasts, not lords of the night." "If you act like beasts, you will be trained like beasts," Cecilia replied, her tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. "Do not be late." The next morning, the air at the Ashen Caldera was thick with sulfur and blistering heat. Rivers of bright orange magma bubbled and spat, illuminating the jagged cavern walls. Standing at the edge of the largest lava lake were the 5 most terrifying commanders in the realm, all looking profoundly miserable. Cecilia stood above them on a sturdy ledge, holding a glowing white crystal to her throat that amplified her voice over the roar of the flames. "Your task is simple," Cecilia announced. With a wave of her hand, a low-level mage stepped forward and cast a spell. Thick, glowing ropes of purple light sprang from the earth, tightly binding the waists of Villainess, Varkas, Moros, and 2 goblin chiefs together in a line. "What is the meaning of this?" Moros gasped, pulling uselessly at the magical tether. "To reach the other side of the caldera, you must cross the floating obsidian stones," Cecilia explained, pointing to a treacherous, winding path of flat rocks drifting in the magma. "You are bound together. If one of you jumps too early, you will pull the others into the fire. If you move too slowly, the stones will sink beneath your weight. You will either learn to move as a single unbroken force, or you will burn together." Varkas stared at the bubbling lava, then back at the vampire he was tied to. "I will not tie my fate to a bloodsucker who trips over his own cape." "Then you had better help him carry his cape," Cecilia called back. "Begin." As the squabbling commanders took their first, terrifying leap onto the floating stones, Malachi stepped out from the shadows of the cavern and came to stand beside Cecilia. He was dressed in light, dark leather to ward off the extreme heat, and his mere presence made the surrounding flames seem to dim in respect. "You are torturing my greatest warriors," Malachi observed, crossing his massive arms. He watched as Moros shrieked, nearly slipping into the magma before Varkas grabbed him by the collar and hauled him upright. "I am teaching them how to survive," Cecilia corrected, watching her commanders closely. "If Crown Prince Alistair attacks with a united front, your lords will fall because they are too busy guarding their backs from each other. They must learn to trust the warrior beside them." Malachi looked away from the chaotic scene on the lava lake, his glowing crimson eyes fixing entirely on her profile. The fierce heat flushed her pale skin, making her silver hair shine like spun moonlight. "Trust," Malachi murmured, testing the word on his tongue. "A rare and dangerous thing in my realm." "But necessary," Cecilia whispered, finally turning to meet his gaze. Without a word, Malachi reached out and gently pulled her away from the ledge, guiding her into a secluded, cooler alcove of the cavern wall. The roar of the commanders bickering over the lava faded into the background. Here, hidden from the eyes of the army, the heavy, electric tension from the previous evening rushed back between them. "We were interrupted," Malachi said softly, his voice a low rumble that vibrated against her skin. He stepped closer, crowding her gently against the smooth obsidian rock. He raised a hand, tracing the line of her jaw with the back of his knuckles. Cecilia's breath caught in her throat. The heat radiating from him was far more intoxicating than the lava outside. "There was a very urgent matter regarding buckets," she managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. "I care nothing for buckets," Malachi whispered, leaning down until his lips hovered just a breath away from hers. "I care only that you are here, changing my world stone by stone." Before Cecilia could reply, he closed the distance, kissing her under the warm glow of the burning earth. Chapter 12. The warning horns of the obsidian keep sounded at first light. Crown Prince Alistair had returned. Driven by his bruised pride and a desperate need to fulfill his prophecy, he had ignored the ancient land treaties entirely. He marched upon the Ashen Pass with 5,000 high paladins, their golden armor glinting like a sea of stars against the dark volcanic rock. Cecilia stood high upon the obsidian battlements, the cold morning wind pulling at her silver hair. She wore a heavy cloak of dark wolf fur over her riding dress, her hands resting calmly on the stone edge. Beside her stood Malachi, clad in his terrifying spiked armor, his hand resting on the hilt of a broadsword that pulsed with dark fire. Below them, the demon generals and goblin chieftains waited for her command. Thanks to her trials at the lava pits, they stood in perfect, unbroken ranks. "He brings the full might of the capital," Malachi observed, his crimson eyes narrowing at the golden army below. "He seeks a glorious battle, blood and fire." "He seeks a story for the bards," Cecilia corrected, unrolling a long, heavy scroll of parchment. "But glory is terribly expensive, and I refuse to let him waste our resources. We will not give him a grand clash. We will drain his strength with perfect timing and endless rules." She turned to Varkas, who held the signal flags. "We will use the measured cycle. The archers and mages will unleash their fury for exactly 5 and 20 minutes. Not a moment more. Then, the shield bearers will step forward, and the attackers will rest for 5 minutes to breathe and restore their magic. We repeat this cycle until the sun sets." Varkas looked confused. "Rest in the middle of a battle, my lady? A tired mage makes mistakes," Cecilia said firmly. "A tired paladin drops his sword. They will charge relentlessly and exhaust themselves. We will fight in steady bursts, remaining fresh and sharp. Turn the sand glass when the first arrow flies." Down below, Crown Prince Alistair spurred his white horse forward, raising his glowing blade. "Malachi, step forth. Face me in single combat, that the heavens may judge the righteous." Cecilia did not let Malachi answer. Instead, she leaned over the battlements and let the heavy scroll of parchment drop. It unrolled endlessly, fluttering down the dark stone wall until it smacked Alistair's horse directly on the nose. "What trickery is this?" Alistair shouted, his horse rearing back. "That is the ancient edict of formal sieges, established in the Second Age," Cecilia called down, her voice ringing clear across the valley. "If you wish to declare a holy war, you must complete the writ of challenge, marked with the wax seals of 3 different kingdoms. Furthermore, you have failed to give the mandatory cycle of the moon's notice before crossing the border. Under the old laws, your men are forbidden from using battering rams." "I care nothing for old papers," Alistair roared, his face turning red. "Paladins charge." The golden army surged forward. On the wall, Varkas turned the large sand glass. The goblin archers and shadow mages rained destruction down upon the valley. For 25 minutes, the sky was dark with arrows and purple fire. The paladins raised their shields, burning their strength to push forward. Then, exactly as the sand ran out, the attack simply stopped. Heavy iron shields slammed down along the battlements. Behind them, the goblins sat, drank water, and rested their arms. Alistair's army, confused by the sudden silence, rushed the walls, only to find no enemies showing their faces. They battered uselessly against the thick stone and iron, wasting their energy. 5 minutes later, the iron shields lifted, and a fresh, completely rested wave of arrows and magic slammed into the exhausted paladins. By the 4th cycle, the golden army was moving like a sluggish river. By the 8th cycle, the paladins were dropping their heavy shields, gasping for breath, while Cecilia's forces remained steady, unbothered, and perfectly in rhythm. Alistair stared in horror at his depleted forces. He had prepared for a wild, chaotic clash of good and evil. He had not prepared for enemies who took scheduled water breaks. "Retreat!" Alistair finally choked out, his horse turning away from the impenetrable fortress. "Fall back to the tree line!" A cheer erupted from the battlements. The unified demon army had broken the greatest crusade in centuries without losing a single soldier. Malachi slowly turned to look at Cecilia. The terrifying demon lord reached out, pulling her close against his armored chest, uncaring of the hundreds of cheering monsters around them. "You did not cast a single spell," Malachi murmured, his voice thick with absolute awe. "Yet you have broken the hero's spirit entirely. Tell me, my brilliant lady, what is our next command?" Cecilia smiled, resting her hands against his armor. I believe it is time to write the terms of their surrender. Chapter 13. The surrender negotiations took place in the courtyard, strictly adhering to the newly drafted Obsidian Wast's external diplomacy guidelines. Crown Prince Alistair sat at the folding table, no longer wearing his blindingly polished golden armor. He looked exhausted, thoroughly demoralized, and deeply intimidated by the two heavily armed gargoyles standing directly behind him. Cecilia slid a thick, precisely bound stack of parchment across the table. "Let us review the terms of your capitulation, Alistair," Cecilia said briskly, tapping her silver pen against the document. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Oakhaven agrees to a permanent demilitarized zone extending 50 miles from the Ashen Pass. Furthermore, your kingdom will open unrestricted trade routes for our goblin metallurgy exports, subject to a highly favorable tariff structure. Alistair stared blankly at the dense legal jargon. "I don't understand half of these words. What is a tariff structure?" "It means you pay us for the privilege of buying our superior swords. And if you default on the payments, we legally repossess your capital city," Cecilia clarified with a terrifyingly pleasant smile. "Sign on the dotted line, please. Press hard, there are 3 carbon magical copies." Defeated by bureaucracy, the Dawnbringer signed the treaty. As the remnants of the Golden Army limped back toward the human realm, Cecilia neatly filed the surrender documents into her leather satchel and marched back into the Grand Keep. She found Malachi in the throne room, but he wasn't sitting on his massive, intimidating obsidian throne. Instead, he was standing by her sensible oak desk, looking at a velvet-bound folder. "The hero has been fully off-boarded," Cecilia announced, setting her satchel down with a satisfied sigh. "The trade agreements alone will increase our GDP by 40% over the next fiscal year. We have officially stabilized the realm, Malachi." Malachi turned to look at her. The dark, crackling energy that usually surrounded him had settled into a warm, thrumming hum. He looked devastatingly regal, his crimson eyes entirely focused on the silver-haired woman who had turned his chaotic apocalypse into a highly profitable enterprise. "You have fulfilled your end of our initial agreement, Lady Cecilia," Malachi rumbled smoothly, closing the distance between them. "You saved my empire, restructured my armies, and neutralized the heroic threat without single-handedly draining our mana reserves." Cecilia suddenly felt a strange, unfamiliar flutter of anxiety in her chest. "Are you terminating my contract?" "I am proposing a merger," Malachi corrected. He handed her the velvet folder. Cecilia opened it, fully expecting to see a revised organizational chart or a new budget proposal. Instead, resting on the left side of the folder, was a flawless, heavy obsidian ring set with a blood-red ruby that pulsed with ancient magic. On the right side was a single piece of parchment, penned in Malachi's own sharp, elegant handwriting. "Proposal of permanent partnership. Role: Demon Empress of the Obsidian Wastes. Term: eternity non-negotiable. Compensation: absolute co-ownership of the realm, command of the legions of the night, and my entire, eternally devoted heart. Signatures required below." Cecilia stared at the document. Her corporate brain, usually capable of processing thousands of data points a second, ground to an absolute halt. She looked up from the parchment to the terrifying, magnificent demon lord. Malachi was looking at her with an expression of such raw, vulnerable hope that it nearly knocked the breath out of her. "I realized," Malachi said, his voice dropping to a rough, velvet whisper, "that having you as a mere consultant was a severe operational liability. I cannot risk you taking your talents to a competitor. I require an exclusivity clause." He reached out, his massive hands gently cupping her face. "Rule this realm with me, Cecilia. Not as an employee. As my equal. As my empress." Tears, completely unscheduled and highly unprofessional, pricked at the corners of Cecilia's eyes. She let out a breathless, joyful laugh, throwing her arms around his armored neck. "The compensation package is extremely competitive," Cecilia whispered against his lips, pulling him down for a kiss that sparked with dark magic and absolute certainty. "I accept the promotion." Chapter 14. The Strategic Operations Hub had been entirely repurposed into the Central Command Center for what Cecilia officially designated Project Eternal Matrimony. Planning a royal demonic wedding in under 4 weeks was a logistical nightmare that would break a normal mortal. But Cecilia had once organized a 3-day corporate summit for 500 tech developers during a regional hurricane. A wedding was simply a merger with better catering. No, Lord Vladis, we are not serving locally sourced peasants for the cocktail hour, Cecilia sighed, crossing a line off her massive scroll. All blood wine must be sustainably sourced from consenting donors who have signed the standard liability waivers. And if I find out you tried to sneak a loophole into the buffet, I will personally audit your crypt. Vladis grumbled, clutching his velvet cape, but dutifully marked down the catering changes. Anne-Marie, Cecilia called out, pointing a quill at her frantic assistant. Confirm the seating chart. Ensure the shadow mages are at least 3 tables away from the Goblin Union representatives. The last time they sat together, a dispute over bread rolls resulted in a localized thunderstorm indoors. Malachi stood in the doorway, leaning against the obsidian frame, entirely captivated by his future empress. She was currently wearing an impeccably tailored dark crimson riding dress, her hair pinned up with enchanted silver combs, fiercely negotiating the floral arrangements with a terrified Treant. He walked up behind her, wrapping his heavy arms around her waist and resting his chin on the top of her head. The entire war room immediately fell dead silent, the various monsters averting their eyes out of respect and fear of the demon lord's rare public display of affection. You are micromanaging the florists, my dark heart, Malachi rumbled smoothly, pressing a kiss to her silver hair. The florists are trying to upcharge us for nightshade, Cecilia grumbled, leaning back into his embrace despite her best professional instincts. I refuse to let them inflate the budget just because it's a royal event. It's the principle of the matter. I will simply burn the forest down if they displease you, Malachi offered helpfully. Let's keep arson as a plan C, she replied, turning in his arms to face him. Her severe, villainous features softened into a genuine, radiant smile. The merger finalization ceremony took place precisely at twilight on the winter solstice. The gates of perdition had been scrubbed clean and adorned with thousands of glowing, magical orchids. Goblins, wearing their mandatory formal loincloths, wept openly in the stands. Cecilia walked down the obsidian aisle to the swelling, slightly intimidating hum of a shadow choir. Her gown was a masterpiece of dark silk and velvet, heavily optimized for both aesthetic terror and ease of movement. Waiting for her at the altar was Malachi. The terrifying supreme architect of nightmares looked devastatingly handsome, his crimson eyes entirely fixed on her, as if she were the only entity in the universe. The high priest of the void, nervously holding a ledger instead of a holy book, cleared his throat. We are gathered here today to witness the eternal acquisition, or union, of Lord Malachi and Lady Cecilia. When it came time for the vows, Cecilia took Malachi's massive, clawed hands in hers. I, Cecilia, take you, Malachi, as my equal partner in all ventures, she promised, her voice clear and carrying across the silent cavern. I vow to optimize your happiness, mitigate our shared risks, and stand by you in every hostile takeover. You are my greatest asset, and I am eternally, entirely off the market. Malachi smiled, a deeply wicked, hopelessly smitten expression. I, Malachi, take you, Cecilia, to be my empress and my doom, he vowed, his deep voice vibrating with absolute devotion. I offer you my empire, my legions, and the complete monopoly of my heart. I will burn the world to keep you safe, and I will submit to your schedule, from this day until the end of time. By the power vested in me by the board of directors, I mean the Dark Council, I pronounce you Demon Lord and Empress, the priest declared. You may finalize the merger. Malachi pulled her in, sealing the eternal contract with a kiss that sent a shockwave of triumphant dark magic echoing across the realm. The goblins cheered, the mages threw sparks, and Cecilia knew with absolute certainty that she had secured the highest possible return on investment. Outro. 1 fiscal year later, the obsidian wastes were completely unrecognizable. Well, aesthetically, it was still a terrifying landscape of jagged black rock, rivers of magma, and skies the color of a fresh bruise. But from an operational standpoint, it was an absolute utopia of peak corporate efficiency. The first annual stakeholder report of the newly unified Demon Empire painted a staggering picture of success. The Goblin Union of Subterranean Metallurgists and Stabbers, Local 402, had successfully transitioned to a 4-day work week, which surprisingly resulted in a 300% increase in overall weapon production. The Undead Division had gone an entire 12 months without a single interdepartmental cannibalism incident, earning them a heavily catered pizza party. Even the gargoyles had unionized, successfully lobbying for better dental coverage and premium stone polishing kits. Most impressively, the neighboring human kingdom of Oakhaven was now heavily dependent on the wastes. Crown Prince Alistair, having thoroughly bankrupted his royal treasury on failed crusades, shiny armor, and terrible PR campaigns, was now effectively a subsidiary client of the Demon Empire's export division. Crown Prince Alistair is requesting an extension on his Q3 debt repayments, Marie announced, adjusting her sensible spectacles. She was no longer a weeping maid. She was now the chief non-human resources and public relations officer, wielding a clipboard with terrifying, uncompromising authority. Cecilia, Empress of the Wastes and Chief Operating Officer of Doom, sat behind a colossal desk made of polished bone and enchanted glass. She wore a dark, glittering crown that matched her perfectly tailored obsidian silk blazer. "Deny the extension, Marie," Cecilia replied smoothly, stamping a piece of parchment with a bright red seal. "Send him a standardized late fee notice, and kindly remind him that if he defaults, we will legally repossess his summer palace to use as a corporate retreat for the Shadow Mages." "Right away, Your Imperial Majesty." Marie gave a crisp nod and marched out of the executive suite, terrifying two passing hellhounds into standing at perfect, unblinking attention. Cecilia sighed happily, admiring the perfectly balanced, black-inked ledger spread across her desk. The numbers were flawless. The margins were pristine. There was not a single REF error in sight. A heavy, warm weight suddenly settled onto her shoulders. Malachi leaned over her chair, his massive spiked pauldrons discarded for the evening. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his broad chest. The scent of wood smoke, ozone, and dark magic instantly short-circuited her professional demeanor, just as it had every single day since their merger. "Are the ledgers finally balanced, my dark heart?" Malachi rumbled smoothly, pressing a soft kiss to the sensitive curve of her neck. "We are operating at a net positive of 4 million gold pieces, overhead is down by 20%, and employee retention is at an all-time high," Cecilia murmured, tilting her head to give him better access. "I would say the Q4 deliverables are fully optimized." Malachi effortlessly turned her heavy velvet swivel chair around, dropping to one knee so he was eye level with her. For a being of infinite, terrifying power, the absolute devotion in his glowing crimson eyes was staggering. He gently took her hands, his thumbs tracing the heavy obsidian wedding band on her finger. "You built an empire out of chaos," Malachi said, his voice dropping to a velvety, intimate whisper. "You conquered my warlords without a sword, defeated the heroes with parchment, and captured the ultimate evil with nothing but sheer, unapologetic audacity. You are the greatest treasure this realm has ever known." Cecilia smiled, her heart doing a completely unoptimized flutter. In her past life, Mia had literally died for a company that replaced her before her obituary was even published. Now, she was ruling a terrifying, highly profitable fantasy realm alongside a fiercely devoted demon lord who worshipped the ground she walked on. It was, without a doubt, the greatest career pivot in history. "Lock the executive suite doors, Malachi," Cecilia whispered, leaning forward to claim her husband's lips. "I am officially out of office." Special chapter. 5 years into their highly successful merger, Cecilia launched her most resource-intensive, high-stakes initiative to date, Project Next Generation Leadership. In layman's terms, she and Malachi had twins. The Royal Nursery, formerly the High Keep's primary war room, now entirely baby-proofed with heavily enchanted, fire-retardant plush carpeting, smelled of expensive baby powder and impending chaos. "Cecilia," Malachi rumbled, his massive frame hunched over a terrifyingly spiked, yet ergonomically optimized, obsidian crib. He sounded genuinely panicked. "The male air is leaking." Cecilia didn't look up from her clipboard. She was currently standing by a massive whiteboard, updating the color-coded developmental Gantt chart for her 4-year-old children. "It is called drooling, Malachi. It is a standard biological subroutine for a toddler processing new teeth." Wipe his chin and log the incident in the dental tracking ledger. Malachi, the supreme architect of nightmares, delicately retrieved a lace-trimmed burp cloth and dabbed the chin of little Prince Silas. Silas possessed his mother's striking silver hair, his father's glowing crimson eyes, and an alarming propensity for spontaneous pyromancy. Beside him in a matching crib sat Princess Vesper. Vesper had raven black hair, tiny obsidian horns peeking through her curls, and the terrifying, cold calculating glare of a senior project manager, who had just found a math error in your quarterly report. They are too fragile, Malachi murmured, pacing in front of the cribs like a caged hellhound. Earlier today, Silas tripped over a goblin plushie. He could have sustained critical damage. I am requisitioning a detail of heavily armored gargoyles to form a permanent, 10-foot perimeter around them. Absolutely not. Over-fortification completely ruins their agility training, Cecilia snapped, capping her dry erase marker. We discussed this during their Q2 performance review. If we micromanage their motor skills, they will never learn spatial awareness. They must learn to properly assess physical risk. They are for Cecilia. They do not know what risk assessment is. Right on cue, Princess Vesper stood up in her crib, gripped the obsidian bars, and stared directly at her father. She raised one tiny, chubby hand and pointed at a jar of enchanted, glowing dark chocolate cookies resting on a high shelf. Cookie, Vesper demanded, her voice an adorable, tiny echo of demonic authority. You have already consumed your allocated sugar rations for the afternoon block, Cecilia intervened, checking her silver pocket watch. Snack protocols will not be reinitiated until 1500 hours. Vesper's eyes narrowed. She looked at the cookie jar, then looked at her brother. She whispered something in a language that sounded suspiciously like ancient abyssal. Silas giggled, clapped his hands, and a small, perfectly controlled orb of purple hellfire shot from his fingertips, cleanly severing the heavy iron hinge of the cabinet holding the cookie jar. The door swung open. Before the jar could fall and shatter, Vesper held out her hand, utilizing a flawless, Tier 3 levitation spell to float the jar directly into her crib. She popped the lid, handed a cookie to her brother as payment for his services, and took one for herself. The entire coordinated heist took less than 6 seconds. Malachi stared at his offspring, his jaw slightly unhinged. Cecilia slowly lowered her clipboard. She looked at the severed iron hinge, the floating cookie jar, and her 2 toddlers, who were now happily chewing on their unauthorized snacks. Did she just outsource the demolition to her brother to bypass the magical wards on the cabinet? Cecilia asked, her voice trembling. It appears so, Malachi breathed, a swell of profound, terrifying pride filling his chest. A coordinated tactical strike. Flawless execution. She leveraged his core competencies to achieve a shared objective, Cecilia whispered, bringing a hand to her mouth as tears of pure joy pricked her eyes. Oh, Malachi. She understands cross-functional synergy. Malachi grinned, a wicked, devastating expression, and wrapped his arm around his empress's waist, pulling her flush against his side. They are going to completely conquer the human realm by the time they are 10. We will have to fast-track their corporate ethics training, Cecilia sniffled happily, leaning her head against his shoulder. But their operational efficiency is simply off the charts. Just then, the heavy nursery doors swung open. Marie, now practically vibrating with the authority of a seasoned executive, marched in. Your Majesties, forgive the interruption, but the Goblin Union is requesting a renegotiation of the toy assembly clause in their contracts, and Lord Vladis is aggressively demanding to know when the twins will be old enough to appreciate a vintage blood wine. Cecilia looked at her beautiful, terrifying family. She looked at the perfectly color-coded whiteboard, mapping out their future dominion. Then she looked up at her fiercely devoted husband, who was currently using a piece of dark magic to playfully levitate a third cookie into Vesper's eager hands. Marie, Cecilia said smoothly, slipping her clipboard into her leather satchel. Inform the Union that negotiations are tabled until Monday, and tell Vladis that if he brings wine near my toddlers again, I will audit his crypt into the Stone Age. Right away, Empress. Marie nodded briskly, turning on her heel. And Marie, Malachi added, his deep voice rumbling through the room as he pulled Cecilia closer, capturing her lips for a brief, electric kiss. Put the entire royal family on out-of-office status for the rest of the weekend. Management is currently engaged in team building.